This video is sponsored by Tab for a Cause. Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. It's been a while since I did a random scale challenge, and I always have fun with them, so I thought I'd try it again. For those of you who weren't here last time, they work like this. I pick a random scale that, as far as I can tell, no one's ever used, and then I pretend it's a real thing, analyze it like it's a real thing, and then write some music with it at the end. This time, though, I'm doing things a little differently. In the past, I've limited myself to 7-note scales. It was just easier to generate the scale if I knew how many notes I was using, and 7's a nice, convenient number that a lot of the most popular scales in Western music use. But it's not the only one, so this time I'm expanding my search. There's no clearly defined boundaries for how big or small a scale can be, but for the sake of this video, I'm gonna limit myself to between 5 and 9 notes. Below 5, the gaps get too big and it starts to feel more like a chord, and above 9, you just have so many notes that it's hard to create a real tonal identity. Beyond that, the rules are basically the same. Once I have the scale, I'll check it on one of my favorite websites, Ian Ring's The Study of Scales, where Ring has compiled a database of every possible collection of the 12 standard notes, and for each one he's added lots of cool facts about it, including, most importantly for our purposes, its name. If it has one, that is. His list is fairly thorough, so if the scale is nameless, I'll assume it's not in any serious use, and thus is available for analysis. Let's just roll one up and... Ooh, fun. Let's do this. So, first impressions, we've got an octatonic scale, which just means it has 8 notes. Interestingly, if we remove this note here, we get this, which looks a lot like a fairly well-known scale called Phrygian. It's not exactly the same. Phrygian has a perfect fourth, whereas our scale has a sharp 4, but still, it gives us a starting point. Phrygian is often used to create dark, almost evil-sounding music, and given the similarities, I think it's a safe bet that this scale works well for that too. Melodically though, there's two things that stand out. First, there's this jump from the flat 3 to the sharp 4. Skips like this pop up fairly frequently in these sorts of random scales, so I won't dwell too long on it, but having two consecutive notes that are more than a whole step apart does some interesting stuff to the melodic structure of the scale, forcing you to leap when you're just trying to walk. It can be awkward, but it also gives the scale its own unique flavor depending on where that forced jump falls, so as long as you're minding the gap, it can be a really useful tool. But again, these aren't too uncommon, so let's turn our attention to the real elephant in the room, the super long run of half steps. We've got 5 notes in a row here running from the tritone all the way up to the flat 7, which is really cool. For starters, it lets us create some pretty restrained melodies. Moving up and down in long half-step runs is a great way to create a sense of rising or falling without actually going much of anywhere. But that's not what really excites me about this. No, my favorite part of these half-steps is how much freedom they give you. If you're outside this area, you can jump into it with basically any interval you want, and once you're inside, you can set up all sorts of different exits by walking to whichever note works best. Every scale step outside of it has major, minor, and perfect intervals that'll take it into the cluster, so you've got practically infinite options for creating different emotions and ideas with it. Effectively, the scale is divided up into 2 very different areas. You've got the section from the flat 7 to the flat 3, where the notes are pretty reasonably spaced and the scale is basically just Phrygian, but then there's the section from the sharp 4 back up to the flat 7, where everything's all super cramped together and literally all the notes are available. And this division is further emphasized by that forced leap I was talking about earlier. If you're approaching the cluster from below, you have to jump into it. Once you're on the flat 3, there's no way to step up, so you have to just go for it, and you can land pretty much anywhere you want. This seems like a super powerful melodic approach, and I suspect you can get a lot of mileage just by alternating between these 2 areas of the scale. Moving on to harmony, things get a little tricky. Basically, the typical approach to harmonizing a scale is just to build chords out of alternating notes, so like the root 3rd and 5th, or the 2nd, 4th, and 6th, but that system is built for 7-note scales. Adding an 8th note makes that messy, so I'm just gonna skip it and look for any recognizable chords I can build out of any of these notes. The first thing I'm looking for is consonant triads, that is, major and minor chords. These are going to be the most stable harmonies, so figuring out which ones we can use is helpful, and the first few that stand out to me are 1 minor, flat 3 major, and flat 6 major. These are the 3 most stable points in natural minor, which again reinforces our minor tonality. We can also build flat 3 minor, although I'm not sure how much that helps, and we can build flat 5 minor, which is a much bigger deal. Why? Well, because it helps build up that duality we saw before. Flat 5 minor is the polar opposite opposite of 1 minor, and playing the 2 chords back to back creates a weird sense of ambiguity. The motion between them is symmetrical, so there's no clear sense of direction, and thus no sense of resolution. It's also just creepy. Minor chords have a haunting quality to them, and tritones have long been associated with horror, so minor chords a tritone apart are a classic trick for creating fear. Oh, and even better, the flat 5 is the beginning of that half-step cluster we saw earlier, which means we can tie that melodic feature together with a distinct harmonic feature, giving us a really strong foundation for writing music with this scale. But there's one last harmonic feature I'd like to point out. We've got a diminished 7th chord. And not just any diminished 7th, we've got one built on the root, making this what's called a diminished scale. This means it'll sound good if you use it as what's called a chord scale, where you play it as a temporary scale over one specific chord in a progression, in this case a diminished chord. These don't come up super often in modern music, at least not compared to other chord qualities like major, minor, and dominant, but they do come up occasionally, so it's always good to have options. This one's an especially interesting diminished scale though, because it's not symmetrical. The traditional diminished scale sounds like this, where you just have an alternating pattern of whole steps and half steps all the way up, but here, in our new scale, you've got a lot more variety. This helps ground the chord. Diminished 7ths are naturally ambiguous, and the traditional diminished scale emphasizes that with its repeating pattern, but the more varied asymmetric structure of our scale instead fights against that ambiguity, tying the chord down to a single defined root. It's a different take on a diminished scale, and one I'm excited to play around with. But now it's time to write something with our new scale. For this, I decided to lean into that 1 minor, flat 5 minor thing from before, and also play up the different note densities in the melody. Then I orchestrated it all with the incredibly popular instrumental duo of flute and old-timey jangly piano. Enjoy! I feel like there's a lot of cool things you can do with this scale. It's got some fantastic features and they all line up in interesting ways. But now I've got to name it. I mean, it's not unused anymore, I just used it. I've named the last couple after things from the channel, like the elephant scale and the gummy bear scale, but I'm running out of those, so instead I'm gonna start naming these after my friends, cause hey, why not? I'm gonna call this one the sideways scale after YouTube's favorite identifier of leitmotifs. If you haven't seen Sideways yet, you should really check it out. There's a link in the description. But before you do that, one last thing. I'm not the only person who gets to write with this scale. For the last few random scale challenges, I've ended by challenging y'all to write your own music with the scales, and both times I've gotten some amazing pieces back from it, so why not do it again? I'll be keeping a master thread over on Twitter at 12tone videos, so send me your compositions there and I'll share them with everybody. I can't wait to see what you come up with. And wouldn't it be great if when you went to send it to me, you were also helping raise money for charity? Well, then you might like this video's sponsor, Tab for a Cause. Tab for a Cause is a free browser extension that lets you automatically raise money for charity every time you open a new tab. It's super easy to use. You just install it, and then whenever you open a tab, it pops up a small, unobtrusive banner ad and then donates the money from that ad to a good cause. It's a small thing, but it really adds up. In total, they've managed to raise almost $750,000 for great charities like Water.org, Human Rights Watch, and the Foundation to Decrease World Suck just by browsing the internet like you normally would. So if you'd like to help out, there's a link in the description to download the extension and get started. Again, there's no cost to you ever. All you have to do is use the internet. Plus, look at their cute little elephant logo. It's adorable. I love it. And hey, thanks for watching, and thanks to our Patreon patrons for supporting us and making these videos possible. If you want to help out and get some sweet perks like sneak peeks of upcoming episodes, there's a link to our Patreon on screen now. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.